Hi, how you doing?
Hey Robert,
Hi, Liz. How are you doing?
I am well. How are you?
Doing well.
I did not set up a waiting room, which I should have. So we'll just kind of on the fly need you to share the presentation, but I've made you co-host.
Oh, okay. Did you want me to bring the presentation up or
Yeah, I think that will be good just to make sure that we can get it working without any issue.
you see this?
Yep, I
You
can
start
I can
to-
I can see your view in PowerPoint.
Oh, good.
Okay, beautiful.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. we have with us presenting on native butterfly and pollinator gardens and some plant connections here for our butterflies. We have Robert Coxe, who we have the honor of having him on our board. And he is currently among many fabulous things that he has done over the years. He has worked as a research scientist for UNC-Chapel Hill. He's also worked with BONAP program, working on some plant polyclaves, and then also he's been an ecologist with the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and most recently a state ecologist for the state of Delaware. He's also currently the co-owner and an innkeeper at McMullen House Bed and Breakfast in Titusville, which is where you can go visit him to go see his amazing native plant gardens. And I will hand it over to you. I'm so excited to hear just everything, really. So thank you, Robert.
Okay. This is about native butterfly and pollinator gardens. And is my sound okay? So what are native plants and butterfly pollinator gardens? Well, native is generally considered to be an organism that was present before permanent European settlement, generally around 1600, or is not aided by humans in getting to North America. But sometimes that can be a hard definition. Sassafras was definitely a native species. The Jamestown colony was cited because of a grove of sassafras, which was considered an aphrodisiac at the time. But then you have the case of Cuban purslane, which one of my graduate advisors, he worked with portulacas and their taxonomy. And Cuban purslane, or Portulaca biloba, was brought over from Cuba in a hurricane in the 1960s. Not aided by humans, came over here, and Georgia Natural Heritage Program, where it landed, considers it to be a native species. So it can have different definitions. Then you have naturalized or inventive. These are generally plants that were exotic. They've become a natural part of the ecosystem. Good example is common dandelion. And there's a European honeybee, which is also from the same place the dandelions came from over in Europe. But there are some native taraxacums over here in North America, mainly over in the western end of the continent. Then you have exotic and introduced. These are things that were introduced and released into the ecosystem, can be invasive or not. Things like spotted lanternfly, purple loosestrife, butterfly bush. There are some native butterfly bushes, but they aren't the ones in horticulture. And then you have what's the definition of a pollinator garden? Pollinator garden is anything that attracts bees, butterflies, moths, other beneficial insects, hummingbirds, other pollinators, and provide a year-round habitat. The butterfly gardens are more of a subset of a pollinator garden that focuses on butterflies, but it also may attract other pollinators for nectaring. Pennsylvania has essentially 5 main families of butterflies. There's a 6th one, the Rhodinidae, which doesn't really have many in Western Pennsylvania. And I've tried to gear this presentation to Western Pennsylvania. But the first one is Hesperidae, which are your skippers and dusky wings. And your major hosts are the grasses, the Poaceae, and the Fabaceae, the legumes. Minor hosts are the birches, the Betulaceae, buckthorns, Rhamnaceae, and the oaks, the Fagaceae. And some of the most common ones are the silver-spotted skipper, Juvenal's dusky wing, and the wild indigo dusky wing. Then you have the Lycinidae, which are the gossamer wings, like the skippers and the Hesperidae. They're also a fairly small butterfly, but they also like legumes, the Fabaceae, the roses, the Rosaceae, and the oaks, the Fagaceae. And minor ones are the heaths and the dogwoods. Some of the more common ones are the eastern-tailed blue. If you've ever seen a blue butterfly flying around, it's probably this one. summer azure. There's also one called a spring azure. Kind of hard to tell apart when they're flying around. And then the banded hair streak. Oh, and an interesting thing about the Lycinidae is they have a sort of a symbiosis. Some of the members of it have a symbiosis with ants. Their caterpillars put out a substance which the ants like, and then the ants help guard the caterpillars from predation. And you have the Nephalidae. This is one of the largest families. Includes the monarch butterflies, it's called the brushfoots. Of course, the host are Apocynaceae, which are where the milkweeds are, violets, fritillaries, and asters for the pearl crescent, which is one of the main ones here in Western Pennsylvania. Then the admirals, like nettles or elms. And also the commas and the question marks are in this group, and the red spotted purple. And this image is one of the more purplish ones, and it's a female of the species. And this is one I write often about in my blog. These are the swallowtails or the Papillonidae, and their major hosts are the roses, the dills, the Apiaceae, Rutaceae, which includes a lot of citrus further south, Salicaceae, such as the populus, and then some are very particular, such as the birthworts, the Aristolochiaceae and the Lauraceae. And some examples are the eastern tiger swallowtail, which is one of the more common ones, Western Pennsylvania, spicebush swallowtail, which is particular to spicebush and sassafras, and the black swallowtail, which likes the dills or the ruse and other things. In the Piridae, this is one of the most common, it has one of its members is one of the most common in Pennsylvania. These are the whites and the sulfurs. And the cabbage white, you've probably often seen these white, small butterflies flying around. This is often a pest on the mustards, broccoli, and other crops. But you also have the clouded sulfurs, which are the kind of yellow butterflies that you see flying around, and the orange sulfurs. The clouded sulfurs like clovers, the trifolium, which are in the legumes, and the orange sulfurs like mustards. So where do butterflies fit in? And forgive me for my triangle, I had to hand draw this. But butterflies are right above the plants and fungi in a chain of predators. You have your soil and aquatic organisms. Then in the soil, you have your plants and your fungi. Fungi can also be down in the soil. Then you have your insects and birds, predators, and humans. And if you were to lose the butterflies, you would lose a critical energy pump and also a critical pollinator to plants. So when you lose a species, it could have a association with a plant or some other animal, which will affect the whole chain and break the link. So how to start your butterfly or pollinator garden? First, you want to determine your climate, and something a lot of gardeners use are the plant hardiness zones. And this is the old map. And I brought in the old map because I wanted to show the change in hardiness zones between the old map here, where you can see a lot of blue. I don't know if you can see my cursor here. You can see a lot of blue going up Laurel Ridge and up along the northern end of Pennsylvania. But then when you go to the new map, it's almost all gone here. It's all become zone 6. And I've gone here in Titusville from zone 5A to zone 6A. And this is all in about 10 years. That's how often they update these hardiness zone maps. So things are definitely warming. And if you go back, you can notice that you can trace the Mon River and Ohio River here, which is in zone 6B, or actually zone 7. And then now it's expanded out. Pittsburgh is all surrounded here. So it's definitely warming. And getting in closer here, you can see all the blue on the old map of Pennsylvania. And here it's mostly green. Here you can see how this is all expanded out here. This is one you don't often see, but this is a plant heat zone. And basically tells you how many days are above 86 in a given year. And this was done in 1991. And I have to think that this has become much greater. There's probably a lot more green here. And then this is another map showing butterfly gardening regions, which was done by Ellen Brunhagen. And Pennsylvania is mostly in the upper South region of the butterflies, the upper Midwest Appalachia. So then you have two main plant groups. You have your host plants and your nectar plants. Now, host plant can be a nectar plant, and a nectar plant can be a host. Generally, any plant's a host to something. But your main host plants here in Western PA would be your milkweeds for the queen butterfly and the monarch butterfly, cherries, and if you want one good species in your garden, it covers a whole lot of things. Black cherry is the thing to get. And you have your grasses for your skippers, nettles for your admirals, and clovers for a whole bunch of other things. Then common nectar plants would be your goldenrods. It also has a host called a wavy line emerald, which is not a very photogenic thing. Joe Pye weeds are very popular. A lot of species of asters and mints. Other things to consider are your geology and your soils. Do you have dry soils? Something in between called mesic or wet soils. Do you have acidic or alkaline soil? Is your soil sandy, loamy, or rocky? These all have a bearing on what plants you want to have. Also, your sun exposure. Do you have full sun, part shade, or shade? So this is a picture of the gardens here at McMullen House. See, we have an arbor here. This is the entrance to them in the backyard, but they surround the house. This is our Monet garden where I have river oats for skippers, New England aster for the admirals. And then I have a lot of nectar plants such as the goldenrods here. I also have staghorn sumacs, New York ironweed, which is a nice nectar plant, spike lobelia. A lot of long-tongued bees like this one has a tubular flower, and saxifrage for a nectar plant. Then you have the wild black cherry, goldenrods. Lenten rose is a good nectar plant in the very early spring. It's one of the first things up. And Virginia spiderwort, which flowers in the morning and then closes up in the afternoon. And have summer grapes, which a lot of birds like. They like to eat the grapes. Have a lot of cone flowers. And it's nearly native. It's not technically native to Western PA. And quaking aspen, black raspberries for the birds, small mammals. I have a lot of bears that like it. Of course, I talked about the coneflower, violets for the fritillaries, milkweeds for the monarchs. And I have a row of arborvitaes, yellow jewelweed, the impatiens, are favored by the bees. Another milkweed called swamp milkweed for the monarchs. Pokeweeds for the doves. They like to eat them in the fall. In about mid-June, we have a lot of hundreds of cedar waxwings go in our service berries along the fence, or what I call a fence garden. And underneath we have royal fern and cinnamon fern, and also black-eyed Susan, which come out later in the fall. We also have a lot of other ferns, such as glade fern. We have some clovers, Ohio goldenrod. Have in the corner, we have a false sunflower, blue-eyed grass, some sedges, blue vervain. And in our kitchen garden, this is where people enter the house. We have brownhead coneflower, Catawba rhododendron, and apple mints. The apple mints are a European plant. They can be kind of aggressive, so you have to be careful with them. But they are a nice nectar plant. We also have liatris here. And I wanted to point out this tachnid fly here. These came in about 2 years ago, and they're an interesting fly. They like to go after the Japanese beetles. So if you have a Japanese beetle problem, these things will often take care of it. I talked about the blazing star, the liatris. We have southern woodland violet, which is at the north end of its range here. Wrinkle leaf goldenrod, if you want a really good goldenrod that's not too aggressive and is a nice nectar plant, is this one to have. You also have flat top goldenrod. In our terrace garden, this is our most shaded area. I have ostrich fern, jack in the pulpit, large flowered trillium, which the deer seem to eat each year, and queen of the prairie. And I also have this big Silphium plant. This is all one plant. It's about 12 years old now. I have purple Joe pieweed, basswood, which is also a common host plant for a lot of butterflies, and some more violets. I have about 18 species of violets around the house. And I was afraid this would happen, so I'll cut to the, I've had a problem with my images scrunching. Okay, so you have our milkweeds here, Asclepias. These are host to the monarch butterfly and the queen butterfly, also the viceroy butterfly, which is a mimic of the monarch butterfly. We'll use milkweeds, and how you tell them apart is the viceroy has a solid line right here on its hindquarters, whereas the monarch doesn't. It can be hard to tell when they're flying around and moving, but that's how you would identify them if they sit still for any time. Of course, the monarchs like milkweeds. So the more common ones you can get in the trade are butterfly weed, swamp milkweed, and common milkweed. You can also have poke milkweed, clasping milkweed in this area. You can have violets for the fritillaries. I'll have a lot of common blue violet, which most everybody would have if they let their lawn go. Southern woodland violet, which actually likes dry, rocky areas. Canada violet, which I call it lawn violet because it seems to like lawns. And the striped cream violet. And I've actually had great spangled fritillary in my yard. I actually took this picture when it was on the butterfly weed. And then Atlantis fritillary. And something about the violets is the seeds are spread by ants. And I have 2 ant colonies within my garden, which they go around and get the violet seeds. And the violet seeds have these little fat globules, which the ants eat. And then when they eat the fat globules, they'll move the seeds around. And so the ants will gradually spread the violets around. And it's something called mimicry. I was talking about the Lycinidae group of butterflies having a symbiotic relationship with ants. Well, the violets have it too. And you'll see a lot of this when you really look at the symbiosis. Another thing you see on the goldenrods is ants will harvest the aphids that like the goldenrods. Another thing I have is the river oats, which host pepper and salt skipper. I haven't yet seen one in the garden, but it's one of their host plants. Lupines, which is the frosted elfin, is a rare species, a rare butterfly in Pennsylvania. And a lot of people plant the lupines to help with the hosting of the frosted elfin. Problem is, in the horticultural industry, you have to be careful that you don't get Lupinus polyphyllus, which is a lupine that's from the Pacific Northwest. The native one is actually Lupinus perennis, which is actually a smaller lupine. It's very adapted to fire ecology, which is the reason why it's rare and why the frosted elfin is rare. So if you're trying to host this butterfly, you want to make sure you're getting the right lupine. Another one is coneflowers. This is hosted by the silvery checker spot and the auto skipper, at least in the Midwest. And but you can grow the pale coneflower, but its host doesn't come this far east. And you have Joe pieweeds, and this is a very favorite nectar plant. You'll see bees growing all over these, butterflies, basically anything, flies. they love this stuff. And I also mentioned the goldenrods are another important nectar plant. These things are all from about mid to late summer. And you have the rosin weeds. I have 3 silphiums, yellow cup, prairie dock, and a compass plant. A lot of the little green metallic bees like these. And in the fall, a lot of the finches, goldfinch, like to eat the seeds. Then you want to take into account the shrubs. The spicebush swallowtail, associated by the spicebush here, has an interesting caterpillar. Has the 2 eye spots to help fool predators. And also the Titan sphinx, which is actually it's also called a hummingbird moth, likes the buttonbush. Now, I'm not getting into moths here because moths are much more numerous than butterflies. And there'll be a talk of several days. Then you have your trees. One is hosted by tulip tree is the tulip tree silk moth. Also hosts the eastern tiger swallowtail. Red maple is hosted by the rosy maple moth. And also some others are the coral hairstreak, spring azure, red spotted purples, a whole bunch of them. So this is an important plant. In vines, you have the pipevine swallowtail, which is hosted by pipevine, and also the gingers. And I didn't want to leave out the bees. I know it's a talk on butterflies and their host plants, but bees are also an important pollinator. Some of the more common ones are the bumblebees, the bombus. One of the ones you see most commonly are the eastern common, bombus impatiens. You also see the 2-spotted. I haven't yet, but I have seen the brown-belted in my yard. But one thing about the bumblebees is they help pollinate the blueberries. They have what's called an ursulate flower, and the motion of their wings helps pollinate these kind of bell-shaped flowers they have, or what's called an ursulate flower. Of course, we have the European honeybee, which is brought over from Europe to fertilize different crop plants. And then you have the carpenter bee. Not necessarily something you want because they are carpenters and they will bore into your house. But these 2 bees here are generally ground nesters, and these are generally form nest. One thing about bees is you want to keep the leaves and dead stems after the growing season, because the bees will go into the hollow stems, especially of the silphium, the jopai weeds, and that's where they'll overwinter. And also the pupa of some butterflies will overwinter underneath leaves and or on twigs or other things. So you want to leave them be after the growing season. Some other things you don't think of are wild ginger, which are beetle pollinated. They have this flower that's on the ground here. See the flowers here. And then you have additional members. We have salamanders, the doves, which eat the pokeweed. We had a screech owl before University of Pittsburgh next to us did a lot of tree work. We have our own rabbits running around. Bats are actually pollinators of some things. They'll actually go to some flowers or roost in some areas and spread pollen. You have the eastern chipmunk. We have bears and deer also. And also, one thing you often don't think about pollinator gardens is you can sometimes get gifts from your other pollinators. They'll fly from other places and then drop seeds in your garden. And some things I've been bestowed with, which I didn't plant but appeared in the garden, spirited shorthusk, which is actually a grass that grows in woodlands. It has these fruits. If you walk through the grass, it will stick to your pants. And sometimes hard to get off. They'll kind of dig into the pants. Grape blue lobelia, which came in between my cone flowers. I talked about the staghorn sumac that came from something. Had an elm tree appear. Torchy now has the Dutch elm disease, and also a false nettle, which host a question mark butterfly and an eastern comma butterfly. And also staghorn helps host a Luna moth. So lawns to help pollinators. This is something a lot of people don't think about. But clover lawns, it's a host plant for some butterflies. It's also a great nectar source. You can grow your lawn in clovers and you don't have to mow it as much. And this is something I've been working on here at McMullen House. It's a moss lawn. And I'm about 60 or 70% coverage of moss now in the front yard. And I've been working on this for some time. And what this moss here has this interesting color. This is fire moss. And if you have sunny spots, moss is like moisture in shaded areas, but this particular moss can handle sun. So I've been sunny spots, I've been trying to encourage it to go in various places. And here you can see where I've been taking little bits of moss off the driveway and other places where moss tends to gather. And I'll take lumps of it and clear off an area of ground and kind of seed it in. And gradually it will help spread. And something this helps the moss is it helps the Pennsylvania firefly, which the grubs or the larvae of the fireflies exist in the moss, and then they come out. And my yard tends to have a lot of fireflies. The Pennsylvania firefly is also the state insect of Pennsylvania. So why plant butterfly and pollinator gardens? Well, they provide a place for insects to feed, reproduce, live, hibernate, whereas grass lawns don't. Grass lawns use a lot of water and also a lot of fertilizer from lawns, and pesticides and herbicides goes into streams and rivers, which is deleterious. And also the lawns cover about 50,000 square miles in the U.S., or something about the size of Pennsylvania in total. And also glyphosate is a really bad problem. And you see a lot of things saying that, well, people aren't using as much pesticides as they used to. Well, technically by weight they aren't. But the ones they're using are 7,000 more times more toxic than the DDT. Also, as I mentioned up here, grass lawns use a lot of water. And Doug Tallamy says if every homeowner allocated half of their land for natural gardens, there would be more habitat than all the national parks combined. So what do butterflies face in the light of climate change? And I added this because in my blog post about swallowtails, I'm often writing in for various places that a certain species of swallowtail is a stray from the south or a stray from the east, meaning it's moving north or west because of changes in temperature. So warmer temperatures cause them to move northward. But when they move northward, they face a lack of their host plants because the host plants don't move as fast as they are moving. Also, they encounter precipitation changes, difference in habitats, population density. And also, when they stay in place, there's becoming a mismatch of phenology. Either the flowers come out before they do, they come out before the flowers, or vice versa. Increased predation, competition, hybridization. So some examples of how you can help looking at the swallowtails, and I talk about the swallowtails here because I know the most about them. One is the zebra swallowtail. This reaches the northern limit of its range, essentially in Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh is right around the edge of the range, and there's a researcher named Gabriel Marsden that's working with the pawpaws, which is the host species here in Pennsylvania for zebra swallowtail. Now, they also feed on other members of the custard apple families, but this is a tropical family, and the only one here in Pennsylvania is the pawpaw. You go further south, there are more Asimina, like Asimina parviflora, and then go into Florida, you actually find the custard apples. But one thing that gardeners can do is, especially up in my region up here in Titusville, is we can plant more pawpaw. So as this species moves northward, and this is a range map of where they are, but gardeners in this area and also up in New York where pawpaw is a rare species, they can plant this in their garden. So when these butterflies move north, they can find a host plant to rear their caterpillars. Another example is the spicebush swallowtail. These feed on members of the laurel family, and here in the East Coast, that includes sassafras and the spicebush. And here you can see the northern limit of the range here is right about the middle of Michigan and up here north. But if people were to plant more spicebush, more sassafras, it would give those spicebush swallowtails that are moving north a host plant to thrive on. And this is something that gardeners might want to, native plant gardeners want to think about. It's not plant for the now, but plant for the what will be, to help those insects that are moving north faster than their host plants are. And then you have the case of the tiger swallowtails. The tiger swallowtails are what you call a generalist. They like a lot of different plants, tulip trees, cherries, aspens, a whole lot of things. But they're still having problems. And one problem they're having is the eastern tiger swallowtail here will hybridize with the Canadian swallowtail. And here at Titusville, I'm kind of what's called a hybridization zone, where these things are hybridizing together. And the thing about the hybrids is they can't handle the cold as much. And the Canadians, or they can't handle the heat as well as the pure eastern tiger swallowtails. Also, the Canadian swallowtails can handle the heat, but for some reason they're not moving north very fast, not as fast as the eastern tiger. So what happens is they hybridize and they don't reproduce. They have problems with the heat, and so they just die off, causing their populations to drop, to fall off. And also climate change is happening over a much shorter time period. And this hybridization between these two has happened before, and it resulted through a mutation in the into the Appalachian swallowtail, which occurs in the southern Appalachians and up through the middle of Pennsylvania. But this hybridization and the mutation happened over thousands of years, whereas climate change now is happening over hundreds of years, which is causing a lot more problems and a lot more effects on the populations of swallowtails. So, in summary, your garden can provide a refugia for butterflies moving north due to climate change. And as I said, you want to try to plant for what will be as much as possible instead of what is the now, because things are changing so fast, as the hardiness zone maps showed. Now, also another factor affecting the hardiness zone maps is they tended to average things a little bit more, but you still see the changes happening. Also, plants can't move as north as fast as the butterflies. Plants don't have wings. Also, butterflies moving north might not be able to find suitable host plants if their host plants are at the northern limits of their range. So, when planting your garden, consider what plants will help the most. So, questions?
There's one in the chat from earlier, Robert. It says, do you actually have queen butterflies up there? I don't know of them being in PA, maybe in Southeast PA.
Yeah, there can be a stray into Pennsylvania sometimes. Yeah, but you're right. Queen butterflies are a more southern species. And if you go really south, you'll find a soldier butterfly, which also does milkweeds. But most of what you'll see up here is the monarch.
We have another question from the chat, which is, are other cherry trees, not just black cherry, beneficial?
Yes, yes, they are. And I only talked about the wild black cherries because it's one of the more common ones. But other things you can plant are the Prunus virginiana, the choke cherries, and there are quite a few other cherries, but they're all about equally useful.
As an add-on to that, are cultivated cherries also used as host plants or no?
Probably more as nectar plants. I'm not sure they're quite used as much as for host plants. Though considering that the things that are hosted for the generalist, it might not be as picky. And I'm thinking of the eastern tiger swallowtail.
All right. Do you recommend?
I just want to say some butterflies are very picky as to what they'll eat, and they'll only eat one host or one species actually of a plant.
We have lots of questions coming in. Do you recommend oak trees as well for hosts?
Yes. I've talked about the dusky wings. They like oak trees. And so that's a good host plant if you want something for the dusky wings.
There's one in the Q&A, which is related to an earlier question. Is Prunus virginiana as important as Prunus
Serotna?
That's the word, yeah.
Yes, it can be. Yeah, when I was mentioning wild black cherry, I didn't mean to say that's the only one. A lot of the cherries are very important.
And from Pam, we have, do you know what I can plant to attract giant swallowtail and zebra swallowtail besides pawpaw?
You might be able to plant some of the other pawpaws, such as the small flowered pawpaw, the Seminiparva. It would be quite north of its range, and it might not be able to handle the cold. Pawpaw is really your best bet here. You do want to make sure you have planted in a shady spot because it can be sensitive to sun.
Another pawpaw question. Do you think if pawpaw trees are planted, we can get zebra swallowtails more northern? We know that they're in mid-Ohio. They're also in some parts of the southwestern tier, like Greene
Correct.
County, right? So
And
do you
that's
think that we can expand their range back up to this area?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would think so. And that's actually what Gabrielle Marsden's working on. She's trying to find all the locations of pawpaws, and she's trying to replant the pawpaws in various places to help the zebra swallowtail. And I wanted to go back to you mentioned the giant swallowtail. If I remember right, the giant swallowtail is a host on the Rutaceae, which is involves a lot of the citrus plants. So if you find a Rutaceae member that can exist in Pennsylvania, that's something you would want to plant for it.
Right. Are there native alternatives to hellebores for early spring blooms? We're gardening in the city of Pittsburgh, and often bees wake up in spring before native flowers are blooming.
Yes, and that's where people are talking about saving your dandelions. No mow May. Dandelions are one of the first things that come up. It's not a native species, but they're here, and you're not really going to get rid of them. But here in Western PA, we have something called the false hellebore, Veratrum viride. Not quite like the Lenten roses, but it's kind of similar. But also a lot of violets will bloom in the early spring, sometimes before spring. And also violets are good for the fritillaries as well.
Are all arborvitae beneficial?
I think so. The arborvitaes are native species or nearly native. They're very native up in Canada. It's a very northern species, and they run down the spine of the Appalachians. But they're fairly beneficial. I can't exactly think of what the host is on them. But if you want a native, screen in your garden, they're a nice thing to have, and it can handle the cold.
Jill has an interesting question. Could you talk some more about the fire requirements for lupines in our area? Do they require fire to grow well?
In your native habitats, they require fire, and that's generally to keep out competition. A lot of the rare locations of the lupines are now on roadsides here in Pennsylvania, but they can grow in your garden as well if you are actually able to find the actual species, which is Lupinus perennis. And if you go out to your local garden center rather than a native plant nursery, as I was saying, you'll probably get the larger lupine, which is actually from the Pacific Northwest. And a lot of seeds you'll find are also the polyphyllus, not the perennis. So you want to be careful there if you're looking for that particular species which hosts the frosted elfin.
How close does one pawpaw colony need to be to another to provide additional habitat for zebra swallowtails?
That would be actually a question for Gabrielle. Not sure how close. I know when I was doing the natural heritage inventory of Greene County, where we had pawpaw, the pawpaw colonies we were finding mainly around the Cheat River, right in the southeast corner, weren't all that close to each other. They're kind of scattered. You'd find a big colony here, and you go into another valley and maybe find another one, but they weren't all in a big mass. They were just kind of here and there. It was something you encounter occasionally, but not all the time.
Yeah, everything I can find quickly is just kind of talking about spacing in a yard. But from my understanding, I know that it's the distance is listed in miles for how far that how close that they can be for, at least for cross pollination. I don't know how that would really relate to the zebra swallowtail habitat, but I assume if it's close enough for them to cross pollinate, it's close enough for the butterflies to hop over.
Yeah. And box elders are native. It's actually a maple, or in that genus.
Then we have a question from Brent. What is the role of woody plants in early spring blooms for pollinators?
Oh, woody plants. You're talking about things like the cherries and.
I would guess like shrubs and the trees.
Yeah, a lot of woody plants are good for spring pollinators because they come out in the spring. Things like cherries, your oaks come out, catkins actually before the leaves. You have maples, some of the first things that come out. You see a lot of the red in the woods. It's from the maple blossoms. So yeah, woody plants are definitely a component.
Everyone's welcome to unmute if you have any more questions.
Please ask. Oh, somebody mentioned that pawpaws can handle full sun. They can. You just have to, make sure they're watered and whatnot. I did have some pawpaw in my garden, but I guess because I originally planted them in kind of a shady area, and then it became sunny when my neighbor, the University of Pittsburgh, cut down a bunch of trees. They started having problems. But I think if they're accustomed to the sun from the start, they can handle it. Somebody mentioned bloodroot. That's another good one. Comes out in the spring. Some others are trout lilies, hepatica, if you have them. Of course, the trilliums, but you have to be careful to deer with them because they really love them.
I have a question. This is Lois, and my question is, with the fluctuation and the different temperatures, how effective do you think winter sowing is going to be, like for milkweed and other pollinators, to get them going, I usually do my milk jugs at the end of January, but now I don't know when I should start them because, you know, it's 60 degrees, it's 30 degrees, it's 10 degrees, it's 45 degrees. So should I start them like next week, or do you think winter sowing is going to be, we should start it in December?
Oh,
I mean, it,
I would have to defer to somebody who knows more about the seed sowing.
I think it comes down to the specific species and what their stratification requirement is, right? Because most of the common species are 30 or 60 days of cold weather, which I think we typically say that cold weather is not even necessarily freezing, but like under 50 degrees. So there are some species that require, 90 days and even, 120 days. And some of those do need to be started in like November or December to get enough cold stratification days or to be cold stratified in the fridge. Your common and swamp milkweeds, those are both, they're either 30 or 60 days. I'm not sure offhand, but I don't think you'll have any trouble with those. Even I know last year everyone had really good germination on milkweed for the most part.
Okay, thank you so much.
And then just another
Enough
note
to-
on that, if you start something and you haven't hit your days yet, don't throw that soil away. You might find some seeds that you sowed that need 120 days might not hit those 120 days until they've had 2 winters, right? So just because they don't sprout 1 year doesn't mean they're not viable. They're still waiting for the appropriate amount of time being cold.
I thank you.
Yeah, I've tried to sow some of my milkweed seeds, but it seems like the milkweed beetles get to them before I do.
Prime time for 1600.
That's why you use net bags.
Oh,
We have another question that says, I want to plant some columbines, but was unsure if I should stay away from double flower varieties. I thought I read somewhere that they're less attractive to pollinators.
yeah, I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah, so I think unless somebody else can speak to this, I believe that double flowers don't produce nectar. I'm hoping someone else who's more of an expert on this can weigh in. It's either nectar or pollen that they don't produce.
Yeah, if you're unsure, I would get the red columbine, the Aquilegia canadensis, which is a native one, and not get the ornamental one.
Kathy asked, what is a good resource for planting times by plant? I'm wondering how to find out about winter sowing times for each plant. I can probably answer that. I personally use the Prairie Moon's website. I find that all of their information is accurate, and they have nearly every species that I'm ever looking for. Most of the nurseries that sell seeds do have good, accurate timeframes for seed stratification.
Yeah, and I was going to also add some other places, sort of Lyndon B. Johnson or the Johnson Wildflower Center. North Carolina State Extension has a pretty good website if your plant occurs in North Carolina. You know, where they'll talk about seed sowing times and where to plant things. And also Dave's Garden and gardenia.net are good places to go. And some about Dave's Garden, they have a forum that you can get to where people actually talk about their experiences with the plants. Yeah,
Christina,
that's an actually a good example. You know, they were talking about the pollen producing parts becoming petals. A lot of roses have been bred that way. If you look at wild roses that you find out in the marshes or out in the wetlands, they have a lot less petals than the ornamental roses you see.
does anyone have any final questions? All right. Well, thank you, Robert, for giving us this presentation
Yes.
today.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Of course, it's so nice to have such a well-educated botanist on our board and willing to speak with us. I am once again just sharing the link in the chat if anyone is interested in being one of our garden tour providers for 2024. And also, if you haven't become a Wild Ones member, I'll share that link there as well. All right.
Robert, could you quickly share your blog information?
Yes, my blog is located at my shop page, and it's the address of it is shop.mcmullenhouse, McMullen house.com. Actually, I might be able to, here it is here.
I shared it in the chat as well.
And this is the address where the blog is. And also, I've been putting some things out on the, or trying to get them out to the Wild Ones website as well. Hopefully, we'll get some more out there. I was going to say, talk about identifying plants. John Cortez and I are still working on trying to get a key out for the North American Flora, where you can identify things on the computer. We first started out doing it with checkboxes, but now with AI and images, we're not sure how exactly it's going to come out. And that's also a good place to look for ranges of your plants. If you're trying to help butterflies that are moving northward or westward, or trying to find a cooler area of escaping from the heat, you can look for plants that are on the edge of your range and see where you can do the most good on planting your garden.
Any last questions, or I think we will close out here. We'll definitely check out Robert's blog that's shared in the chat. And also, if the recording will be available, I will try to get it hosted to YouTube as soon as possible. And if you're going to be anywhere near Titusville, check out McMullen House.
Yeah, I'd love to have you come up. And every May, around about the weekend before Memorial Day, we have a spring wildflower walk up here with the Botanical Society. And you're welcome to come up for that. We show the garden, and we also go out in the Oil Creek State Park, see the natural gardens there on the bike trail. So you can see a whole lot of things.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for a lovely evening. I see the Youngstown Wild One chapter, Lois commented that there's a butterfly festival July 20th from 2 to 4. So we're not that far from Youngstown, so you may want to check that out.
Yeah.
And I suppose while before I say goodbye, we have our symposium, our second annual symposium on the 14th of March. It is at Frick Environmental Center. And we've got some really exciting speakers lined up, and it's all about sustainable land management practices. And we will also have our 2024 plant sale on June 15th at Riverfront Trail in Aspinwall. So be on the lookout for those two big events this spring. And thank you, thank you all for being here. And I hope that you all have a great evening.
Thank you.
Great evening, everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Lois, I just sent you the link to the tickets for our symposium.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for tuning in for our chapter's talk tonight.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I'd be interested in your butterfly festival.
September 2023, the U.S. recognized 2 new nations in free association with New Zealand. The UA.
All right, Robert, I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you again so
Okay.
much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
And I'll be in touch about our web committee meeting soon.
Okay. Yeah, I'm
All right.
interested in helping with it.
I appreciate that. Well, everyone have a great night.
You same. Have a good night.
Thanks. Bye-bye.